Okay, now, so what we're going to do tonight, and I had it up here, I see some of you grabbed some, was the continuation of last week's lesson. So it's not a new lesson. That's just, I should have hid these because normally I don't put out new ones unless, yeah. So if you grabbed another packet thinking it was new, it's the same as last week. But there's up here if anybody needs one. Anybody need one? Okay. Uh-oh. We need two. Did anybody unsuspectingly grab one that doesn't need it? Because if you did, give it to Elaine. Okay. On our fancy new copier, yeah. Should take no time. No, go ahead. We'll make a copy real quick. You grabbed one unsuspectingly? All right, it's all good. It's all good. Normally I don't put those on the table, but I asked Kelly to set them out on the table, and I wasn't thinking. Normally I had them over here, because otherwise there you think they're new, but it's actually last week. So is everybody good? No? Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, so let's review a little bit where we're at, get up to speed, and then I gave you all a little homework. I see that look in your eyes. Oh, no. The dog ate it. So we're looking at the vision of the 70 weeks, which is contained in Daniel chapter 9. And we began looking at that, and we understand the first part of the chapter is a prayer of Daniel. We didn't dig into that, but we began around verse 20. And verses 20 to 23 kind of talk about the circumstances. So who's involved in this situation? Who are our key characters here? Daniel and Gabriel. Yeah. Daniel and Gabriel. So Gabriel is explaining to him now. That's actually a good question. So what's happening here is Gabriel explaining something that Daniel has seen in a dream or a vision? What's happening? Daniel was praying, and then Gabriel came to speak to him. So what is happening now at this point? Is Gabriel here to explain a vision or a dream that Daniel had, or what's happening? He's explaining to him. So he's basically narrating through this conversation, here's what's going to happen. So it's not necessarily a dream or a vision. It's Gabriel telling Daniel, here it is. Which is still, I don't want to use the word miraculous, but it's stupendous. Go ahead, Richard. There's a story. But,
did Gabriel approach Daniel here?
uh-huh.
How did Daniel know? You think Gabriel introduced himself?
Well, what do you guys think? He was extremely weary, and he gave me instruction and talked with me and said, "Oh, Daniel, I've now come forth." So, not any kind of prostration or anything here, right? So, okay. Right. Yeah. We believe that he possibly is the one who's been dealing with them with the other stuff, with other things that have occurred. Now, remember, we're all the way in chapter 9, so there's been other visions. Remember the ram and the goat, and it said, so there's a possibility that they've already established, yeah, they're good buddies. So that's kind of where I would lean on this, is that this is a continuing of a relationship that they began, as far as where we talked about an angel before. I don't know if it was in Trying to remember, not by name, but a lot of scholars believe it was him, though. Yeah, but it's a possibility that it wasn't. So that's a possibility that a lot of scholars think at this point that they've already had interaction. That's why he's not too taken aback here. Okay, so Gabriel's explaining what's going to happen, and then in verse 24, he begins with this. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people. Who are the people? Israel. And your holy city. What's that? Jerusalem. To finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Period. To anoint the most holy. Why are we saying anoint the most holy? Well, here's why. We're saying that these 6 things are going to occur within this something that has to do with this 70-week time frame. Now, we determine something about the nature of the weeks. Are they literal? Figurative? Literal and figurative? Trenton? Could be weeks, years, months, days. Okay. So let's narrow it down a little bit. What's that? Okay, so not a literal week. Okay. Okay, that was the days. That was the days of chapter 8. The 350 days, yes. So way we understand this is that the weeks are representative of years. So we have 77s, which would be representative of, what's that work out to? 490 years. Okay, so we have 490 year span. So now, is this 490 years that is represented by the 77s figurative or literal? 490 years? Okay, what's that? Was this a legitimate statement or should I move on? You both are laughing, so back to Danny. Okay, so the question is the 490 based on the 77s literal or figurative? Literal. It's a literal 490 year span of time. Because some would say that it's figurative, representing a complete but indefinite period of time. Do we have anything else in apocalyptic language that is an indefinite but complete period of time that is represented by a number? Okay, in apocalyptic language. So you have the 70 years, which was written about by what prophet? Jeremiah. Okay, but what about the millennium? That a literal 1,000 years? So it's a number that is representative of a complete yet indefinite amount of time. That's the way we interpret that. It's not a literal 1,000 years. Are there some there that say that that is literal? Yes. But do we have here a dream or a vision that is figurative in nature? Is this a dream or a vision? This is what? This is a direct communication. So this 70 weeks, it's figuratively literal. Literally figurative, yes. So it's figurative in the sense that the weeks are representative of years, but the years are in fact a definite 490, and that is not figurative, it's literal. Everybody with me? So we have to figure out then what we're talking about. And so we said that these 6 things that are listed in verse 24 would need to occur. And what is our perspective that is informing the way that we look at this? What? Okay, that's a specific event, but what's our overall perspective that's going to inform the way we look at this? Larry, I heard you say something, I couldn't make it out. Okay. Pertaining to the first coming of Jesus, not the second. So that's the overall perspective that is guiding us here. And so if we understand that, we look at these 6 things, what did we say about those? Based on the nature of these 6 things and what we broke them down, could they logically and reasonably be fulfilled in the first coming of Jesus? Yes. Is there any reason why we couldn't do that? There's not. Now, what about the end of verse 24 that would make that an issue? If it was the holy place, could make that problematic. But the better interpretation is the most holy, referring to Jesus Christ. Is Jesus Christ ever referred to that in the New Testament? By whom? Demons said, we know that you are the Holy One of God. And there's other places too, but we said the demons were, even the demons declared that he was the most holy. We know who you are. Okay, so we looked at those 6 things, and so then we determined that we were going to begin to look at this chart. And so what I asked you to do was compare them one to another and tell me what was different and what was similar. Are these similar? Are they different? Are they saying the same thing 3 different ways? Are they apples and oranges? What do we have here? Okay. Where do we differ? Okay, so his concludes at when? What's our date? 26 AD, yes. So his concludes at AD 26. So his, on this chart, look at the title of it, says Countdown to Christ. So this would include what he has here as a total of 69 heptads. Remember, what's a heptad? It's a 7, a group of 7. 77s, that's where he gets the term heptad. Right? So if we look at his, we understand that we have a breakdown here. So let's read the scripture and see why we've got these divisions within these heptads. Don't we sound smart when we use words like that? Heptad? Has anybody here ever used the word heptad other than this right here? Yeah, me neither. So, now, verse 25. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. So go back to verse 24. What's the total number of weeks or heptads? 70. What do we have here in this verse? We have a total of 69. So we have the 7 heptads is listed first, and then a grouping of 62. So that gives us Doc Smith's chart, the whole part of it as far as the chronology. So then we have down at the bottom, there's 2 different ones. Now, if you see George Fall here, he has the correct view, and then the title for this bottom one is the traditional view. So let's look at this. Do we have groups of heptads on these? Yep, the same, right? 49, 7 heptads, 49 years, and then a group of 438 years. And then here in this we have a third division. So the heptads are described as being divided into 7, and then 62, and then 1, giving us a total of 70. So the 1 there, the final heptad, the final week, is divided on both of these into 3.5 years. Okay? So, go ahead. Okay, yep, as you look here, you can see that on the correct view, we have the cross here, and then in 30 AD on the bottom, it doesn't have that visual of the cross, but everything, these are all pretty well the same, right? So we've kind of identified the similarities here, but they all have one fundamental difference. What is it? The starting point. The ending dates are all the same. Well, his would include the last week as being the same chronology. So everything that they are chronologically speaking, they're identical. Smith doesn't include the last week here, as that's in another chart. But other than that, chronologically they're identical, except on the start. What's different about the start? You said the start, so they have different starting times. They all have 457, but how are they different? Or how are they the same? What's the difference? They're labeled differently, right? All 3 of these come up with the same date, but 3 different ways to get to that same date. Okay, so beginning with the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, the street and the wall shall be built, even in troublesome times. At least 3 possible decrees. So there are decrees that were made historically, and we have to identify which of these decrees is. Here's what they call it. They call it the terminus pro quo or the terminus a quo, and that just simply means the starting point. See, this is where we were talking about like having a treasure map with like take 7 paces north, 4 paces. You're not going to find the proper place to dig unless you have the proper starting point. So in this, see, if you go to verse 25, it says, so that you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree, what? To restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So now we got to figure out when and if there was a decree made to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Here's the fun part. There were multiple decrees. And to add to that, there are different views on the years and the timing of years and all this kind of stuff. So we're going to see. So if you notice on Doc Smith's decree to restore Jerusalem referenced, he goes to Ezra chapter 4 verses 12 and 16 and ends up with 457 BC. So he says that decree, well, hold on. Let's just back up. Go to page 4 in your lesson, and we'll look at these decrees. So we have the decree of Cyrus. Who was Cyrus? King of Persia. And so Cyrus, actually, we're going to see this on Sunday, that what's called the Neo-Babylonian Empire is coming to an end. It's been quite a while since Nebuchadnezzar, and there is a king that's reigning, but he is not a normal king. His name is Nabonidus. And so he's actually living outside the main of the center of the Babylonian Empire, because he's not exactly welcomed by the people, but he's still the king. And so his son, who's quite the knucklehead, we're going to see this on Sunday morning, Belshazzar, He's the one that's back in Babylon, the center of Babylon, and he's ruling from there, and he's the one that's governing over the Jewish folks, and so they relate to him as their king, even though he's not technically king. So Belshazzar is doing his thing, and then we find out that Cyrus is invading, and Persia's coming to power, and so eventually we know that Persia does come to power, and Cyrus makes a decree. So the decree of Cyrus is 539 to 538 BC. All right. So to rebuild the temple and the city, you can look at Ezra 1, 1 through 4, Isaiah 44, 26 to 28, and 45, 13. Now, if one starts here, then the 70 weeks cannot be literal 490 years. Why? Because that would place the end of the 70 weeks around 55 BC, much too early. Now, the appeal of using this decree as a starting point, it is the most well-known decree regarding the restoration of Israel, and it was given about the time Daniel received his vision of the 70 weeks. Now, this decree is preferred by many who do not hold a literal 490 years. So then we have the decree of Artaxerxes in 457. You can see that in Ezra chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. Now, for Ezra to restore the law and its worship, so Ezra, from what you know, what was he doing? Was he restoring the city? Okay, but yeah, he was restoring the law, but the law doesn't work without what? The temple. So Ezra was involved with the temple and restoring the law. So some have a problem with this, saying, well, this says that the city's going to be restored. Well, what we see in Ezra 7, 13, 14 is that he actually did receive permission to reinstate the nobles and the magistrates and those that would be involved in governing and also rebuilding the city. So Ezra did do some city rebuilding. And the one thing that he had trouble accomplishing was what? Okay, right. But the one thing that they could not accomplish, so he eventually got there with the help of Haggai and Zechariah, but what was he unable to get done? One of you already said it. No. The wall. That's what he couldn't get done. So we had another decree, right? Second decree of Artaxerxes, which we studied in depth, for Nehemiah to rebuild the wall. But it also says in there about the city. Now, if you start there, you end around 38 AD, and we have problems. So, Gary, you mentioned last week, why don't we start and work backwards? Right? Okay. So, if we start and work backwards, we end up at what date? 457, according to these charts, that if we have the coming of the Messiah being at AD 26, is that a good date? It's not a good date? Okay, so if we want to say the baptism of Jesus, and that's what we have here, so on 26 AD, on the bottom one, the traditional view, Messiah anointed, would that be, would the anointing of Jesus and the baptism of Jesus have anything to do with one another? They're one and the same. Okay, so both of these charts are saying the same thing. So do we have any problems with Jesus being baptized in AD 26? Okay, so how old would Jesus be here? So we know he began his earthly ministry, Bible tells us, at what age? 20. Yeah, right? Okay, so he's 30 here. Then that's going to put everything ending around AD 30 for 33 years, right? So do we have a problem? Okay, so because AD BC is, what's the line of demarcation there? Why do we have that? Okay, so then if we understand that AD BC and that 0 being his what? Then we have a problem. So what have we determined? What has been determined? And this has been determined that the calendar's off by about 3 to 4 years. So Jesus' birth in reality was approximately 4 BC. So then if that does take us 4 to 26, how old is he at his baptism? Do those numbers work? Everybody with me? Okay, go ahead. Okay, so there was problems with the Roman calendars and so forth and so on, and I don't have the specifics about this, how they determined that it was off, but I can get you that. It's pretty well documented historical fact that some say even 5 or 6 BC that Jesus was born, but we say 3 or 4 is what in reality is what it was. So you should be able to Google the actual birth date of Jesus and what went on with, and find plenty of scholarly articles on that. When was this? I don't know the beginning. I don't know. No, I think it's the calendars. They've known the calendar was wrong for a long time. What were you saying? Yes, yeah. So I want to say it goes back long time. Maybe even hundreds of years. We can look into that when that was discovered. It's not to my understanding, it's not a recent thing where they discovered that the calendar, the dating was incorrect. Okay, so, but what do we have different on these 3 that still is a bit of a rock in our shoe? So, Doc Smith says that his is the decree to restore Jerusalem referenced is in Ezra chapter 4, verse 12. It is God making the decree through Ezra. That Ezra is the one that's speaking, and he is communicating the decree. That's where Doc Smith lands. So the decree is actually God's decree. It's not Cyrus or Artaxerxes. That's where he lands. Now, here's where it gets fun. Look down here in 457 BC, Ezra. Down here, on the traditional view, it's based on Ezra chapter 7, not Ezra chapter 4. So the decree of Artaxerxes, it's Artaxerxes' decree that is recorded by Ezra in Ezra chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. So that's where that starting point comes. Now here's the one that gets tricky. Look at George Falls. He says his is the correct view. Who's the decree? Where's the decree made? Cyrus. Okay, we look at back to our papers, and you will find Cyrus almost everywhere you look, 539 to 538. But George has the decree of Cyrus in 457. Everybody see the difference? Okay. How do you think he justifies this being the decree of Cyrus in 457? Anybody have a guess? What's that? No. Okay. Here's what he says. The chronology, I can't even say that right. The chronology of the Persian kings based on Ptolemy. Now, if you get this, you get 1,000,000 points. When he says Ptolemy, Ptolemy. Who's that? You guys remember this? I don't say if you get a million points. So when Alexander, when he died, split into 4 kingdoms, one of the breakoffs was Ptolemy, and Ptolemy went to where was that kingdom set up? Egypt. Okay? So if you're going according to the dating and stuff, it says here that it's tied to Ptolemy. He says that dating is in error by 80 years. Now, I have not had the opportunity to find any more that I could read or find a rationale behind this from George and his stuff other than what he has here in his Daniel book. I know that there's more to this. I've just not been able to unearth it yet, and as you know, he passed. So my goal is to get hold of Kendall, because I'm pretty sure Kendall would be aware of this, and see if we can flesh out, or if somebody has a cassette tape player that I could borrow. I have the cassettes of this class in my office, and I think I could probably find the description of this account and why he says it's off 80 years. But the reason that George has his beginning with the command of Cyrus is because he believes the command of Cyrus actually happened 80 years earlier, happening in 457. I can't give you any more information other than that he believes this. I don't have the information as to why. So we're all kind of in the same boat here. Now, 3 different ways we all get to the same place. Now, based on what I know right now, and I don't have a whole lot of knowledge of this calendar discrepancy, which would be off by 80 years, I really do think that the decree of Artaxerxes, in the traditional view, works just fine, and it's solid. Okay? So, if that is indeed the case, then that brings us to AD 26, because we have the 7 heptads, the 49 years. Now, then we have the restoring of Jerusalem, which would take place. Jerusalem finished, would have been finished in what year according to our charts? The 7 heptads. What's the conclusion? What year does that bring us to? What's that? No. The first 7 heptads, the restoring of Jerusalem, gets us to what year? 408. Then we have the 69 heptads, a total of 434 years, that gets us to AD 26, and the baptism of Jesus. So then we have, on the 2 bottom charts, the description here of something that looks like 1 week and 3.5 and 3.5. So where do we get that? So anything we read so far that gets us this part of the chart? Anything that we've read so far, could we pull out what we read here? No. Nothing that we've read so far would give us this last week. We still have to go further in the text. So we go to verse 26. Then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with the flood, even to the end. There will be war, desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So these 2 verses are where we get the final week. Now, our dispensationalists, here's how they explain this. They say that the 69 weeks that lead up to Jesus are in fact solid. But then they say the last week that there's a pause button, and that God hit this pause button or stopped the stopwatch, right? And when the tribulation occurs is when he will restart it. And so What happened was, and this is how they describe it, is that God sent His Son in the hopes of ushering in an earthly kingdom, but did it work? What do they say? They rejected Him, crucified Him, so God went to plan B. You guys not heard this? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it's the basic same construct. I don't know that dispensationalists say that, but there are those who say that that it's representative of a time. So the 69 heptads are literal, but the 1 week there's a pause, and then we'll resume the 1 week later, is because they're trying to take the book of Revelation and cram it into this, and that's how they make it work. You almost have to say it that way, that He went to plan B because plan A didn't work. And so the church then was a backup plan, was a reaction to the fact that plan A didn't work. Now, just the idea of that should make you uncomfortable. Now, I'm speaking of it in very basic terms. There's probably dispensationalists right now that would hit me in the head with a rock. But if you take their logic to its conclusion, they are saying that God went to plan B, went to a backup plan, went to something else because it didn't. The church was an afterthought. And the church then he could resume his plan that would take place within the tribulation 7 years? Is that the time of Revelation? Is it 7 years? And so they plug all this into the earthly reign of Christ. And going back to verse 24, they needed to say holy place, because what needs to happen? Temple rebuilt, and it restored and once again anointed. Okay.
How do they get around verse 27 when it says this prince, the Messiah, we know it's talking about Jesus?
Okay, hold on now. What prince? Be careful here, because there are actually two princes. If you're talking about Messiah the prince in verse 25, that is him. But the other prince here, I just want to be careful about the language here when we use the word prince, because the second prince is not the Messiah. But anyway, you were saying, how do they get around?
In verse 27, that He's going to put an end to the sacrifice, the grain offerings, and all that. And we know in the Old Covenant that was under the Old Covenant, and when
They believe all that's going to be restored, that this was just a temporary stay, not ended.
What happened to the veil of the temple? When
Right?
the old
All going to be restored. That's what they say. Now, but there should be a certain book of the Bible that should be flashing in your mind as to, no, we're not going to start Judaism back up again. Hebrews, right? Because what does it say about Jesus' sacrifice? Once for all. Right? They're not going to go back to temple worship. Not happening. You gotta ignore the book of Hebrews if you're a dispensationalist.
Well, Peter got in big trouble from Paul.
They all did. Book of Galatians, you got to ignore the book of Galatians too. Right? Because they were trying to bring back Judaism. And the whole book of, as Donnie taught us, the whole book of Galatians is, no, it's done. Period. Now, we've got about 10 minutes. We need to wrap this up and see if we can get to the final place here. So, after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. All right, so let's go to page 5. The Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. Now, this refers to the death of Christ. Okay, so if we're saying he's going to be cut off, and we're saying then that whose death occurs midway through the 70th week. Now, if we look at our charts, we see how this is playing out, right? So from Jesus' baptism to his crucifixion is 3.5 years acceptable. Absolutely. Right? Because we know that Jesus' earthly ministry, we speak of it in what terms? It was 3 years. Right? So if it's not exactly 3 years to the day, if it's 3 years and 1 day, we would still say what? 3 years, right? We don't say 4 years until it's 4 years. So 3.5 is perfectly acceptable, right? Yes. Okay. So the actual period of time that Jesus in his ministry, 3.5 years, is perfectly acceptable. Now, if you notice, we have 3.5 years on the other side of that concludes the week, right? So that 3.5 year, now down here in the bottom it says ministry in heaven. The top doesn't describe. So now, what is it after about 3.5 years, where was the gospel preached only? Okay, in Jerusalem, was there anything that occurred where it would have been preached elsewhere other than Jerusalem? Was there anything that occurred? 3.5 years. Persecution, okay, be more specific. No, that's much later, we think. Okay. Okay, what happened with Stephen? He was martyred, right? And then after he was martyred, what does it say? The people left, and as they left, they went preaching. Where did they go? Where did some of them go? Where did Philip go? We're not uttermost yet, but that's the point where it went out from Jerusalem. Now, did it go out by the disciples, the apostles at this point? No, they needed a little more of a push, but from that point, the gospel began to spread following the martyrdom of Stephen outside of Jerusalem. Not like it would once Paul was converted. Paul, once all that occurred, then things really kicked up a notch. And then once Peter got on board, then it really picked up. So we have this 7-year period following the baptism of Jesus. Baptism? Following the baptism of Jesus. Okay. So here it says, then after 62 weeks the Messiah will be cut off. We say that is that's his death. And have nothing in the people of the prince. Okay, of the prince. Now, if you notice in your text, this is actually a good translation. Look at the prince of verse 25 and the prince of verse 26. What's the difference in the translation? Most of you probably have this. There's capitalized, right? Why would this one be little? Because not him. Okay, because what's happening here? The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Okay, so we know that this happened when? 70 AD. So this is wrong then, right? Because this is supposed to happen within the last week, right? Okay, so if we're saying that what's described here in verses 25 and 26, or 26 and 27, are descriptive of that 7-year period, that last week, then I lost my train of thought. Okay, then what we're saying here about the prince and who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. You guys said that sounds like 70 AD. Well, then we're past 33, right? We're past that. So the last week then, is this wrong? Is there a way to understand this to where okay, let's think of it in these terms. Why did 70 AD happen? Because of idols? Okay, Jesus told him it was going to happen. Why did it happen? Punishment for what? What'd you say, Beth? Okay, just the rejection of him? They killed him. Okay, when did that take place? Which heptad? The 70th heptad, right? So during that time, when they crucified the Messiah, they sealed their fate. Would we agree with that? No going back now. And they would be held responsible for what they did during that final week, during that 70th heptad. That judgment took place there and then, but it was not executed until 70 AD. So the prince is who of verse 26? I heard it. Rome. It's Rome. It's Rome. They would besiege Jerusalem in 66 and then finally lay waste to it in 70. And did they destroy the city and the sanctuary? And its end will come with a flood. Even to then there will be war, desolations are determined. Now, you should know of a New Testament passage of Scripture that sounds a lot like this. Matthew chapter 24. You want to see Matthew 24? It's right here. Now let's look at verse 27. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. Now, I would say, so now here's what happens. Dispensationalists, who do they want the he to be here? Nope. Is it capitalized in your book? Okay, they left it little for a reason. They say the he, dispensationalist here, is the Antichrist. All I'm going to say is they got this one really wrong. Because the he here is Jesus. Jesus, for 1 week, if you go to your papers, he shall confirm a covenant with many. He is Jesus. Now, did Jesus confirm a covenant in this time period? What covenant? Confirmed by his blood. The blood of the new covenant sealed the new covenant. He confirmed a covenant with many during this 1 week. Describes the work done by Jesus. Now, not only would the confirming of this covenant be because of the blood of Jesus, but he himself initiated it, but it really took effect in the people when? Pentecost. The day of Pentecost, when the people first took part in the new covenant, covered by the blood of that covenant, in baptism on the day of Pentecost. And that work was through whom? The apostles, empowered by the Holy Spirit. So confirm a covenant describes the work done by Jesus and his apostles in Israel before and immediately after his death. Now, his earthly ministry lasted about 3.5 years. The gospel was preached only to Jews for 3 to 4 years after Pentecost. There's your 1 week. The death of Stephen, and then from that point, the persecution caused the people to scatter, and as they scattered, it says that they went about preaching. They went about preaching the gospel. Now, in the middle of the week, he shall bring it in to sacrifice and offering. Barb, this is what you were saying. We're saying that now sacrifice and offering, all the things that are contained within the law of Moses, were those carried over? No. Done. It's over. He shall make an end to it. Book of Hebrews talks about this over and over again. The Old Testament priest stands daily ministering, offering the blood of bulls and goats and sacrifice after sacrifice. It's never enough, but Jesus once for all made that perfect sacrifice when he carried his own blood into the true tabernacle, that which is in heaven, and offered his blood as a once-for-all sacrifice to put an end to all this nonsense. And it is not coming back. It's done. So, through his death, Hebrews chapter 10, verses 12 to 18, you can read that, he brought the need for sacrifices to an end. Now, the abomination and desolation to come, again, read Matthew chapter 24. You'll see that this is referred to by Jesus, and this is what is happening. Their fate and their judgment was sealed in the crucifixion where they killed Jesus, and it would happen later in AD 70. Now, our author here says that may be the consequence of what occurred in the 70th week, even though it occurred after the 70th week. I would personally say it's not a may, that's what it is. Now, there's a list of books there if you want to do further reading on this. All of these look at it from an all-millennial perspective. And Gary, you'd said that they use gap theory in Genesis. That's essentially what dispensationalists do. They use gap theory where God stopped the clock. And so, dispensational premillennialists. Now, so we have then the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9. Any questions? Yes, okay, while the passage is admittedly difficult, let's not lose sight of the wonderful promises concerning the Messiah's work related to sin and righteousness. For Jesus, through his death, has truly brought an end to the consequences of sin and introduced everlasting righteousness. There's no denying that. Now, if you look at these charts, 3 different ways to get to 457. I want to get some more information. I'm going to work on that about how do we justify Cyrus's decree as 80 years earlier and what's going on with the Ptolemaic calendar. I will try to get some more answers on that. If you want to help, look into that too yourself, I would love. But seriously, if anybody does have a little cassette player that they would allow me to use, you got me? Okay. All right, so Brian said he would help me out with that, so that's cool. I used to have one around here somewhere, but it disappeared. It might have met Larry and found its way to the dumpster. So, hey, you know what would look pretty in here? Or some flowery thing? Oh, no, okay, all right. So, yes, sir. Okay, all right. It's one of those, huh? The old dual deck boom boxes? All right, I just want something little. All right, any questions about any of this? Seriously, if you have questions, I know we went over a little bit, but we got started a little bit late. Go ahead.
One question or thought. The premillennial.
Uh-huh.
Why do they do what they do? Are they trying to get to the end where everybody can get a second chance?
What's the motivation, the underlying desire to accept a dispensational premillennial view? All right, let me think this through. Okay. It goes back to the Counter-Reformation. And so the Reformationists were saying, we know who this is in the man of lawlessness and the little horn. Who did they say it was, remember? Who? Papacy. So the papacy issued a counter-reformation, and in that they began a program where they were pushing all this stuff into a futurist interpretation to take the pressure off the Pope. And so that dynamic was the foothold for the dispensational premillennial belief to take place. And if we go back to, I'm digging deep here. The lady that had visions? I believe so. And so you tie into, was that part of this? Am I putting things together that belong together? There was a lady that had a vision in the late 1800s, mid 1800s, early 1900s. I think it was in the 1800s. I'll have to look that up. So that the seabeds of what happened with that and the futuristic explanation, and then combining the entities of the Antichrist, the beast of Revelation and stuff. So then we end up with just kind of a whole mess. And then it's very sensational. And so it's people, so then people have taken those things and found out that you can make money on this, I think. And that's why this has just exploded in the 20th and 21st centuries. These dispensational premillennial views have exploded during that time period. And ultimately Satan's behind it. Because I believe it to be a seriously false teaching that takes you places that you have to compromise your interpretation of other scriptures, like the book of Daniel. Everything in the book of Daniel has to do with the first coming of Christ, not the second. Trenton? Oh, certainly. Not just on this subject, but many others, that there'll be false teachers that seek their own gain out of it. And frankly, there are many that have made lots of money on this. Doug? Cyrus of Persia, the son of Esther? Okay, so, man, you guys are really hitting me hard tonight. All right, so was what happened with Esther, did that help the acceptance of the Jewish people? Yeah, there's something to that, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I know you studied Esther quite a bit. She's tied to... Right. Cyrus was before Artaxerxes. About 80 years before. I'll have to look and see. Donna, you should know this stuff. Tell us. Richard, do you have any answers? You looking it up? Okay. All right. Sorry for keeping y'all after.